everyone, this is the very first episode of the Other Animals podcast. I'm Lucy, and today I want to talk about the words we use as vegan activists and vegans, as well as the ideology and aspirations of the animal movement. I'm going to be reviewing the second chapter of a book to do that. A little disclaimer, some of it will be directly from the book, some of it will be my own interpretation and opinions. I'm definitely not an expert in philosophy, so the book I'm going to be talking about is Defending Animal Rights by Tom Regan. Tom Regan passed away. He was a professor in philosophy. He specialized in animal rights theory. He had a definite influence on the animal rights movement, especially with his book, The Case for Animal Rights. He also was besties with Carolynn for a while. So the chapter we're going to be talking about is chapter 2, Animal Liberation, What's in a Name? So, when animal advocates and activists say we stand for animal welfare, love, compassion, kindness, we hear also animal protection, human responsibility to other animals, animal liberation, animal rights. When we say these things, do they all mean the same thing? Or do we have some blind spots on their effects and on their true meaning? So the question that he asks us here is it enough to just be against animal cruelty? He also distinguishes the anti-cruelty stance from the pro-welfare stance. I found that interesting. The anti-cruelty stance is about decreasing cruelty. There's a quote from him that explains it. There is another higher obligation, namely, to be of service to them by promoting their good, something not captured by the prohibition against cruelty. For example, pro-welfare people want to enrich the lives of the animals used for scientific purposes and alleviate their boredom. Anti-cruelty advocates have less of an intelligible basis for doing that, as boredom is not technically the same as pain. As a side note, I think these days at least, we kind of confuse the two. I think these two things are very similar, but yeah, interesting distinction. So now he moves into welfarism and the distinction between welfarism and an animal rights view. Welfarism is the opposite of abolitionism / veganism / an animal rights view. Abolitionism is basically the rejection of using animals as instruments to human ends. When the term vegan was coined in 1944 in the UK, veganism was coined as an abolitionist thing. It was the whole point of it. It wasn't to make sure that animals have bigger cages or that they have a better, happier slavery or happier exploitation, that they have less pain while they're being used and exploited. It was really rejecting the use and exploitation of animals. So when you think about it, abolitionism, animal rights, and veganism are all synonyms. Something that can get quite frustrating for someone who is an abolitionist, talking to other vegans that might be new welfarists. New welfarists believe that animal welfare will help us achieve animal liberation. So basically advocating for bigger cages, etc. will help us with the end goal of animal liberation. If you want to read more about that, there's this really cool book called Rain Without Thunder by Gary L. Francione. So yeah, coming back to my point, what gets frustrating when you talk to new welfarists is that the industries themselves that exploit animals and profit off of them are totally on board with welfarism. They use that in their campaigns, their ad campaigns. They use that for their image. They use that to help people feel better about buying their products, to make people feel like it's okay to exploit animals, and to alleviate the guilt and the cognitive dissonance that come with these choices. So are we actually opposing these industries and the status of animals as resources when we support animal welfare, or are we making it easier for the industries to exploit animals and for people to feel better contributing to that? This can be a little controversial sometimes, but I think it's a very important question to ask ourselves. I want to quote some of the things he said. The philosophy of animal welfare by its very nature permits utilizing other animals for human purposes. Welfare reforms within the system of utilization will not change the system in any fundamental way. When a system is unjust to the core, respect for justice demands abolition. The true objective for which animal advocates should aim, according to the rights view, is not to provide non-human animals with larger cages, but to empty them. So Regan, as I already mentioned, aligns with the animal rights stance. He says that people should not basically only align with the anti-cruelty stance or the welfare stance for reasons already mentioned. He moves on to the term animal liberation. So he says that basically animal liberation is an appropriate description, but it can be misunderstood. So one view of it can be of an egalitarian interpretation of interests. For more about that, you can read Animal Liberation by Peter Singer. So everyone's interests must be considered equally, animals included. That is this view. Regan believes that this understanding of animal liberation is profoundly mistaken. So this basically is utilitarianism. He gives an example with cattle slavery, quote, "Merely to count the interests of the slaves equitably is not equivalent to liberating them. Whether they should be liberated depends on the interests other people have, including the interests of slave owners. If the results of canvassing interests in this way yield one answer, the slaves should be liberated. If not, then not." Another one is, "The interests of those who profit from slavery should play no role whatsoever in deciding whether to abolish the institution that furthers those interests. It is the right of slaves to be free, not to be treated as another's property or used as a mere means to another's ends. A system of cattle slavery systematically violates these basic moral rights, not the principle that we must count equal interests equally. What is true of human liberation is no less true of animal liberation. That the interests of non-human animals are not counted for, or when they are, not counted equitably is a symptom, not the underlying cause, of their systematic exploitation. The fundamental wrong is the failure to respect their basic moral rights, including their rights to life, liberty, and bodily integrity." End quote. So basically I wanted to touch on one thing here. What he means in this quote is basically just like the human right to be protected from being murdered. So of course, if you kill someone through an accident, it's not really the violation of a right because it's manslaughter. It's like not murder. There's a difference between murdering someone with intent and manslaughter. The same goes with animals. If you walk on the sidewalk and you kill an ant by accident, it's not murder. Same if you run over someone without the intent of murdering them, it's not murder, it's manslaughter. The same goes with self-defense or survival situations. If you kill someone because there is nothing to eat and you're starving to death and you have hunger brain, that is a different scenario than murdering someone because you want to murder them without needing to for survival. It's the same for self-defense. For example, if someone is attacking you, them being human or an animal, defending yourself is different from murder. So I think as activists we have to be a little careful when we talk about the right to life. I honestly believe that it's not the best way to go about it. I think the best way to go about it is to say the right to not be used as property, the right to not be used at all and to be free from exploitation and to be protected from becoming a slave basically. So he says at the end of the chapter that animal liberation is the goal for which animal rights is the philosophy. I think it's very important to make sure that the words we use are on point and that we deliver a clear message to Malzahns and non-vegans. It's also important to talk about welfare versus animal rights. It's very important. I found a quote by Regan to end this podcast. "Being kind to animals is not enough. Avoiding cruelty is not enough. Housing animals in more comfortable, larger cages is not enough. Whether we exploit animals to eat, to wear, to entertain us, or to learn, the truth of animal rights requires empty cages, not larger cages." So yeah, if you're considering reading this book, please consider asking your local public library, if you have one, to buy it so that more people might read it, and also maybe buying it secondhand. So yeah, reject animal use and exploitation by going vegan if you want already, and get active for the animals. I believe it's really our duty as vegans to do what we can do to help animals not to be treated as resources anymore. We need all of you, so thanks so much for listening to the first episode. I'm very excited about this new podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this. Have a good one.